Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back to the show. Jake Horne joining us again here, our president and mentor from the Student Compass from Washington Depot, Connecticut. He hails here today live once again on the show to talk more about, well, the infamous gap year, what that is, and of course, how we can help you with all of your post-gap year college planning and so much more. So welcome back to the show. How are you today?
I'm swell. Thank you, Jill. Good to be back here. It's wonderful.
I know, some beautiful hot weather, right? Still in the Northeast for us. It's amazing.
A little too hot.
I know. What's going on? Jake, you're based out of Connecticut, but you're working with students all over, right? Let's just point that out
correct.
off the top.
All over the world.
Great.
Yes.
And how do we contact you? What's the website?
So the website is www.thestudentcompass.com, and it should come up at the top of certainly a Google search.
It sure does. Well, tell us a little bit about the company, what it is you do, and then we'll get into today's narrative for the day. Since it is our second podcast, I know we have an area of focus. So, Jake, overall, give us a little insight to what you do and how you can help our viewers and listeners today.
Well, thank you, and again, great to be here. I've been working with students who are graduating from high school before they go off to college in planning a year away from sort of the traditional what they've been doing in school, what they've been doing in their communities, and stepping out into the world to become much more sort of independent people. And so I've been doing this since 1991. So I've had a fair number of young men and women who've gone off into the big wide world and come back rather different, more capable, and more confident people. So that's sort of generally what I do, but I help them plan for their year.
Fantastic. And I know that's part of your narrative today to kind of, talk more about the Gen Z students, right? Young adults that are not remotely prepared, you say, to effectively take on the profound transformative changes and challenges they will have to face throughout their lifetime. So we're excited to find out about this singular moment called the gap year. Please walk us through it. Thank you.
So to start off, we are Paleolithic people. The Paleolithic human has been around for a couple million years.
Yes, we have.
but it really represents sort of this population in which humans evolved into Homo sapiens and began to gather together in groups, tribes or whatever, and small communities. And so our brains are sort of wired for all of what that entails, which really means that the survival of those communities in those days had so much to do with young kids growing up to become adults and becoming functional, productive individuals in the community who could be trusted and who could work hard and be part of sustaining that community. Part of that exercise, it just came naturally, was this transition from being a kid to being an adult, and it really has a lot to do with learning the skills necessary to be a productive member of that community, and the rite of passage. And there are lots of rites of passage out there, but the rite of passage really was proof that you as an individual had those skills and you had the merit to become a member of this community, and be productive. So that is embedded in the psyche of modern human beings today, that there is this transition that has to have between being a dependent adolescent to becoming a productive adult. Okay, the gap year is really a vehicle for achieving much of that as a rite of passage, but also as a stepping out into the world and proving to yourself, let alone your community, that you really are capable and you can manage the rigors of the world. Now, the rigors of the world have changed considerably since the Paleolithic period, and that's what I want to talk about, not necessarily today, but in future podcasts. But ultimately, the experience of stepping out of your local community, out of the schools that you've been cocooned in for 14 plus years, and taking on the adventure of the marvels of the world and the different cultures and different ways of expression is exciting. And that these young individuals graduating from high school, they really do have this in them to kind of, they want adventure. They really do want to understand more about how the world works. They're curious. And this is a tool for them to go out and discover it, learn more about themselves in the meantime, and develop a much more sort of broader understanding and perspective of their place in the world.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you for that. And by the way, if you are just tuning in, don't forget, Jay can be reached at thestudentcompass.com. Go to the website. You can Google him and the company. It'll pop right up. And we're excited to talk more about this gap year and all he's doing. I got to know you, in our last show personally about your own lifestyle. And this is kind of what you did as well, right? You took that year off and, people didn't understand it back then. And here you are and doing so well, finishing with your degrees and then now helping so many. So it works. And I told you last time we spoke about, I only heard about the gap year here in the States about when Kate Middleton and Prince William met. But this is something so common in other countries, which, is amazing to know how successful it is and really helps that individual grow during that transition period where they are a little young and mature. It gives them that year to grow. And that says volumes. It's going to help them in their academics later on, in their workforce later on. So thank you, Jake. All right, I'll let you continue.
So what's happened is, first you have to understand what world the Gen Z population has grown up in. And it's been singularly unique.
Yeah.
It's not that past generations haven't had to deal with struggles or instability or difficulties, but what's rolling down the pike at these kids is profound. But what they've experienced in the last 24 years has been one traumatic experience after another, beginning with 9/11, and the various school shootings, the political instability, economic recessions and collapse. The sort of chronic daily bad news, and felt, in many of these cases, felt really intimately in how it impacts their families, and so unlike, I think, certainly my generation, I mean, I'm part of the boomer generation. I mean, it was all great, but these kids have grown up with a deep sense of not being able to trust, that which we all trusted, which was the stability of society. The earth is shifting underneath them, and that things aren't being fixed very well. My generation did a lousy job. All previous generations typically do a lousy job, but they complain about the new generation. The new generation are products of what we have created and trained. And so nonetheless, these kids are bright. They're really interested and interesting, but they're different because their growing up experiences have been so totally different. And going through the pandemic sort of put the nail on the coffin for a lot of these kids, because they were distanced from the normal social interactions that they would have with their friends. And that's where growth happens. That's what humans have historically always done, to be able to share, to be able to communicate, to be able to learn from each other, and to feed off of each other for ideas and just, sort of creative juice. The pandemic shut everybody down, and what was left was the internet and social media, which of course is not like being with friends, though it tries to portray itself as being that way. But there's no physicality to it. There's no intimacy. There's no sense of connection that is, really human. And so more and more kids have learned how to relate to the world through social media, and it's really put them in a position where they've been much more isolated. And there's an enormous expression of anxiety right now, because of the past, because of the present, because of the lack of sort of institutions that we all counted on to be sort of for us to ground ourselves.
Correct.
And then, families are busy. Everybody's busy, and it's hard, to pay attention. So these kids are out there, and they've got this, foundation, which is really not great. Schools have not really done a particularly good job at bringing these kids into this new world.
Yeah.
They're still working off of the past model, which is, SAT prep, college prep, right or wrong answers. It's all binary, and we live in a world now which we know is really not binary
Mm-hmm.
anymore, and it's confusing. And so
Sure
the
is.
ability to develop sort of a deeper sense of identity, to be able to learn and practice thinking critically, to be able to be creative, it's just harder because these kids, we all need practice. That's how our brains develop expertise. We
Mm-hmm.
just get to practice it. Well, these kids haven't had that chance. Certainly not to the degree that past generations have. But on top of that, they've got all this stuff coming at them at the same time, which is going to require much greater agility,
Yeah.
much greater thoughtfulness, a deeper appreciation for the complexity of life and complexity of decision making. There's nothing simple, and everything has ramifications. So, my intention here is to give what kids I work with and other kids who just simply take a gap year an opportunity to get a boost in that sense of what their capacities and capabilities are, and to feel more confident, to be able to be more, to believe in themselves more, and to be able to be willing to take risks, stretch themselves out, and be their own self-agents. That's an overused word, but the responsibility is on them, not their parents.
Very true.
Ultimately, if they're going to get the most out of college, they've really got to be ready as young adults to know that it's their thing and they have to go after it and they have to be vigorous. And, if they haven't had any of that practice, a great way to learn how to get to that point is take a gap year. And there's, we're all living to 100 years. Well, I'm not going to, but 100 years, these kids have got plenty of time. 1 year at this very critical juncture of their lives is absolutely profound. And they really, kids that I've worked with who've taken a gap year, they really come back very, very different. And they've had incredible college experiences and, life trajectories.
Yeah.
So,
And that's what you're continuing to do. And at this time, let's just remind everyone how we can reach out to you again, website, phone number, any social media pages before we continue.
Sure. So it's, again, Jake Horne is my name. It's thestudentcompass.com. My number, actually, I'll give you my telephone number is 860-921-6158. And I actually just started a Substack newsletter, which is under the Student Compass.
Okay.
And it has a lot of this information, which also links you to the website too.
Beautiful.
So there should be plenty there.
Well,
but I really, I think that these kids are up against it. I think they have enormous potential. They're different. And, employers complain all the time about how unprepared they are. The fact of the matter is they have good reason to be unprepared.
They sure do.
Because they haven't had a lot to count on. And they haven't had a lot of practice. I think, and on top of that, not to be harsh on families, but I think so many of these kids have been protected. They haven't been expected to manage the difficulties of growing up. And their parents have been snowplowing the way for them, or helicoptering, or whatever it is now. So to remove all obstacles, so their performance, supposedly, their performance in school, their performance in life will be so much smoother. But if you don't, like all human beings, you learn by challenges. You learn by making mistakes. And if you don't have anything to work to solve, you don't know how to do it. So these kids actually, there's so many that are actually stepping out into the big wide world after college, and they don't know how to manage. They're literally babes in the woods. But at the same time, they don't trust this. They don't trust employers. They don't trust, this whole work ethic. They're challenging all of that because what's the point? What they're going to get is this messy thing that they've had to deal with throughout their lives too. So there's a lot going on. I don't think that has to be the way it always is, but they're new to this and they've had no practice. So again, the gap year is really a jump start for them to learn how to take on the world much more in their own best interest, go to college and get so much more out of that college experience.
Got it. You mentioned how the Gen Z students need to take time away from their social cocoons, right, in silos, because Yeah, this generation, they're all over the tablets, the phones, the social media, the gaming, and yeah, and that's what I worry about. Some of these younger generation, how are they going to function at work when they're so used to having their heads in an electronic, right? Um,
Right.
they need to, and it's so sad because that's the way society is, and so you cannot let your child partake in this, but there has to be moderation, right? And
Sure.
the real world awakening of can't have that phone on you when you're working, can't have that phone on you when you're in college. Like you have to focus. And,
Right.
it's a shame that this has happened to us, but it's okay because as you know, you're working with so many Gen Zers, they can get through it, right? Can you give us
Well,
some
they can get
examples of
through
the
it.
people? Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, they also need to know how to get through it too, because that's
Yes.
all that's been their life. That's all they've ever known is the screen time. And so, I mean, the kids I work with typically go off and
Okay.
then they're not carrying their phones
Wow.
or
Mm-hmm.
their phones or somewhere where they're not. And they learn for the first time that actually they can have a life that's interesting. And actually they observe the world much more readily because there are
Yeah.
no distractions. And so, part of my hope is that the kids, more and more kids will take gap years to learn more about what their own capacities and capabilities are
Wow.
um, in their own right, and not based on the resume that's been built for them, which is shallow and has really nothing to do with any real depth. But they don't the tech they have to learn how to use technology really well because there's going to be just more and more and more and more, and they've got to be able to discriminate what is healthy, what is not healthy, what's true, what's not true, and what the long term ramifications are going to be for society in
Yeah.
all aspects of life. And we're seeing this with the AI, which is really interesting because it has great potential for being a powerful tool for the human progress and future. But also, we know humans are flawed, and they will use these technologies to get gain power. They'll to gain wealth, to gain those things which are not in the best interest of society. And in a zero sum world we live in, I think we do. I mean, sadly, I win, you lose, and I get more
Yeah.
power, and you
Yeah.
diminish power. So,
Well, thank you for that. And what else did you want our listeners to know about the process of working with you? And I want to hear some examples of the students you helped, if you don't mind. It's always good to
not at all.
walk through that and to hear, about the amazing results that, you can help guide a family through.
Yeah, and so again, I work with kids from all over the world, and they all do lots of different kinds of things. Some they take on, they go into sort of programs that are sort of international programs, and they can be very expensive. They're also really pretty great, but you don't have to do that. Part of this is just simply stepping out of your
Okay.
community and going somewhere else that is new, and that's a start. But so, I mean, I've had kids go out to,
Mm.
let's say, out west, out to New Mexico,
Yeah.
and volunteered in a Native American community in a clinic, or doing some political advocacy. I've had kids working political campaigns for that matter. It's not expensive. I mean, you don't get paid much, but it's a pretty different dynamic. I've had kids go and do research on
Yeah.
sea turtles as
Aw.
indicators of environmental health, coral reef restoration,
Wow.
working in marine aquariums down in Florida or in the Seychelles. Um, I've had kids go to Europe and backpack around Europe, simply backpacking,
Yeah.
getting a cheap URL pass and just going from hostel to hostel. I mean, just doing that is incredible because you meet people from all over the world who are doing this. Americans, it's just beginning to dawn on them that maybe this isn't a
Yeah.
bad idea. And I would say actually I mean, some of the schools I really do work with, I mean, the post-secondary schools, they like gap year kids because they come back really sort of much, much more engaged and much more independent. And even some of these schools are encouraging kids to take the gap year, but even so built into their particular programs They are some do have gap year components because it's experiential. So
Yeah.
I had a young gal who was really interested in medicine. She ended up heading off to New Zealand.
Wow.
She worked in a community, a Maori community there, and
Okay.
in the clinic, and learned a lot about Maoris, a completely different Aboriginal culture, the difficulties of their communities and things they're confronted with, but also the difficulties of medical care. And she ended up deciding that she really was much more interested in in medicine, but in medical research. And so she ended up shifting went to college, shifted her major, and ended up going,
Impressive.
graduating, getting a job in a genetic research lab. And now she's
Wow.
into the world of genetics and decoding that genetics as it impacts physical health, actually, in mental health as well. Um, Another example, I had a young gal who I have a lot of young women who work with me. It's great. I think they're much more braver than young men, though I think these young men need to get out there. But
Mm-hmm.
who went to Paris and worked in an atelier as an intern. And she was really interested in fashion and colors and shapes and designs. And she ended up practicing and developing her French, speaking skills. She came back fluent in French, decided that she had to get to Vietnam. As strange as this sounds, she raised money for herself, got herself to Vietnam, and ended up working with a small family in Vietnam that
Wow.
produced silk and for clothing. And she learned all about the business of manufacturing different kinds of silks, different colors, shapes, patterns, how that is marketed around the world. And she eventually went into the fashion world in New York
Amazing.
after graduating. I mean, these stories
Yeah.
sort of go on and on and on. So, but the thing is that she said, before I went away, there's no way I could have approached anybody in the couture world or
Nope.
anybody in the fashion world and felt confident enough. When I came back, I had so much to say. I had so much energy and so much, sort of understanding of the complexity that people wanted to hire me, and they
Wow.
said it was amazing. The stories, the interviews were wonderful. So, I mean, again, these kids, they go off and do these things, and they come back, and they're just different. But they have much more confidence in themselves. They have lots to say,
Mm-hmm.
and they are the ones who get the jobs because they're the ones who have the emotional intelligence. They've developed levels of creativity, or they want to practice that level of creativity. They
Yep.
are, they're resilient. They adapt. I mean, all these things that actually businesses today are looking for. They're looking for these kinds of skills in their future employees, the people they want to hire, not necessarily people with hard skills. I mean, they want people with some hard skills, but they're much more interested in the ability of these individuals to add value to the company in all the ways that are possible, in terms of leadership, in terms of shared teamwork and collaboration. I mean, just these are things that naturally come out of the gap year. They're not taught in school. They're not really taught in college.
Yeah.
And so these kids. So this is irrespective of how you deal with all these transformations that are coming down the pike, and how you thrive within those contexts. Because I think that there are lots of challenges that can be pretty scary, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, there's tremendous amount of opportunity, and you just have to be capable of looking into the future, thinking about yourself and your relationship with the world, with your and with how you want to participate and what sort of charges you, and then pursue it with a passion, as opposed to
Beautiful.
sort of sitting back and saying, well, it'll come to me, because that's the way it's always been.
Exactly.
Not going to do that.
Well, we
I
have
don't know if
just
that's enough.
no, well, we have only
Yeah.
2 more minutes left of the show, so we have to kind of
Okay.
wrap it up
Right.
first. But what else did you want to share before we have to go? How did you kind of want to end off for today and for your listeners and viewers?
Well, we're going to do a bunch of these, and it's going to be interesting to how to parse them out. But ultimately, I do want everybody to understand the connection between what's happened to this generation in the past, what they need now, and how they're going to thrive in the future, so they can take on these challenges that they're going to have to inherit from us.
Yeah.
And it's just simply not fair for them to be expected to manage this stuff and not give them the mentoring and care and support that they really need to take it on. Because I think they're going to be fully capable of doing it.
Yeah.
If they are given these opportunities, and their parents let them take these opportunities.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Of course it is. Let's talk how we contact you, how we can reach out, and what that process is like.
Great. So again, the name of my company is The Student Compass. The website is www.thestudentcompass. My name is Jake Horne, Horne. My telephone number is 860-921-6158. And literally, feel free to call. I'm happy to chat with anybody. There's no fees or not anything. It's a chat. And I can certainly explain more. And I will in future podcasts about sort of how the nitty-gritty process actually occurs. But I wanted to get sort of through the sort of philosophical piece. So get in touch with me. Please feel free. And I love what I do. These kids are great. And I want them, and I hope they will have great futures. Beautiful. But it's going to be complicated.
All right. Well, thank you for helping them along the journey. Remind us one more time of the website before we go.
www.thestudentcompass.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the next time we connect. Thank you for being so thorough. Great show again today, Jake. And we'll chat next week, I hope.
Great show. Yep.
Thank you
Have fun.
so much. You too. And to all of our listeners, stay tuned. We'll be right back with more. Please stay with us.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.